Greetings, curious acolytes of the Force, and welcome back to the Archives. Many Sith Lords of the past, present, and future eras of the Star Wars timeline made their staple on the galaxy, and a good handful of them would go down in history for one reason or another. Since they were obsessed with gaining as much power and influence as possible, their methods would change from one Lord to the next. Some devoted themselves to building a strong army and holding their battle skills to perfection, while others would study the dark side extensively in hopes of gaining knowledge that would make them the ultimate being. Whatever their method, we have done a good few lists on Sith for different reasons. Well, as you know, power and skill are not everything, because the Jedi can match that blow for blow. What makes the most successful Sith in history has always been their intelligence. Having a good head on your shoulders makes all the difference, especially when you are deciding to take on the entire Republic and the Jedi along with them. The dark side is a pathway to many powers that can grant superiority, but too many Sith Lords lose themselves to the madness and lust of power. This leaves a couple of Sith that stand out from the rest as the smartest of the Order, and this is the topic of today's video and holocron opening. Now my friends, this battle station is fully operational. However, we have been picking up on our scanners that many of the starships entering have not yet registered with our systems. If you like what we do here and want to get updated whenever we post our daily Star Wars videos, be sure to blast that subscribe button. Now, let us examine this ancient Sith holocron. First, we have the Sith Lord Darth Tenebrus. We have done a video on Darth Tenebrus recently. However, we'll do a quick recap of his advancements that made him one of the most intelligent Sith that has ever lived during his tenure as a Dark Lord. During the Rule of Two era, Darth Tenebrus was the master of Darth Plagueis, as the species known as a Bith. He somewhat went against the norm of that species, as they were typically known for being rather peaceful. However, Darth Tenebrus did lean into their other reputation, which was being quite intelligent naturally. Tenebrus was first and foremost a scientist, one who viewed the Force more as an unlimited source of energy, rather than subscribing to it being any kind of mystical entity. He preferred to use it scientifically, and test its limits in the physical world, and was much less enthusiastic about the religious aspect of the Sith Order. We put Tenebrus on this list because he and his master had come up with the idea that the Sith Grand Plan would come about by a way of a virus that would sever the Jedi's connection to the Force, not through any means of the Force itself. I think this is a rather creative solution compared to all of the other superweapon type plans that came about from most other Sith Lords. Tenebrus had also been the one to manipulate Plagueis' parents into meeting so that they could give birth to Plagueis, and allow Tenebrus to train a child with a greater force potential than his apprentice, preferring to play the long game and manufacture his perfect prodigy without the parents ever even knowing about it. He had also created a pseudo form of essence transfer by creating what is known as the maxi-chlorians. This literally allowed him to separate his consciousness from his body and live inside of Plagueis' very cells without Plagueis ever knowing about his presence. As accomplished as this all sounds, we have chosen to place him a little bit higher up on our tier list because despite his advancements, he had very few achievements, which is why we have placed him on tier 3 of most intelligent Sith. Many of Darth Tenebrus' experiments ended in failure, which includes the Virus Project. Although he had perfected the maxi-chlorian essence transfer method, he gave into panic when he discovered that Plagueis was going to die before he could get to his ultimate goal, possessing the Chosen One. Rather than wait it out for a bit to possess someone else, he let his fear take over and he abandoned ship, returning to his husk of a body, wherein his consciousness was then thrown into a hellish loop of reliving his death over and over again for eternity. These shortcomings are why we have decided to leave him in the bottom tier. Also in tier 3, we have Darth Endedu, another Sith Lord that we like to cover a lot. Darth Endedu was the pioneer of the Darth title, among many other achievements of course, but that was not what he was most noted for. Endedu was the creator of the ability of Dark Transfer, and would be the first Sith to discover the power of immortality. He would use this power to rule on the deep core world known as Prakith for several thousand years. Whenever he had correctly guessed that his Sith underlings were going to betray him, he had successfully faked his own death and fled to Prakith, where with his old followers, they would never find him. Although they discovered the truth about his fake death, his followers never did find Lord Endedu, and they lost the secret to eternal life for the next 1,000 years. Endedu was an extremely powerful sorcerer who would perfect and create a great many spells and powers of his own, all of which he hoarded personally for himself. He was smart also for being able to sense the growing betrayal in his followers and underlings. However, we place him in this tier because although he was intelligent, he made some very unwise decisions by giving into his paranoia. Despite the fact that his fear saved him once, he allowed that same paranoia that his followers would somehow soon find him to make Endedu shut himself into his stronghold and be buried amongst all of his knowledge, never sharing it. His spirit was also later trapped and encased in a tomb of his own design, again allowing himself to be tricked when his paranoia was once again used against him. Now moving on to Tier 2. We will only be discussing one Sith Lord that we believe belongs in Tier 2, as the rest are highly intelligent and all belong in the first tier. But now, let us discuss the Sith Lord that belongs firmly in Tier 2, known as Belia Darzu. We know very little about Belia Darzu other than that she was a Sith sorceress and scientist, as well as the Dark Lord of the Sith in the twilight days of the new Sith Wars. She was a species known as a She-Do, which were a group of shapeshifters, and her holocron self would constantly shift forms as she spoke. We place her on this list because of her invention of the Technovirus and the Techno Beasts that resulted from it. She had also perfected the art of Maku Daru, which was the ability to use the Force to essentially download the knowledge of any droid or piece of technology straight to their own mind and then have a complete record and control of it. Darth Bane would find her holocron in a stronghold on Tython, a Jedi world, where it was in a chamber filled with her techno beasts which were still alive and loyal to her. The way that the technovirus worked was that it was an airborne pathogen which contained spores which would infect a living organism's mind and slowly spread over their brain and entire body, forcefully mutating them into a cyborg creature that was subservient to its creator. Despite the fact that the flesh had long since rotted away and their weapons of war barely worked, the techno beasts were still operational more than 1,000 years after their initial creation. It would be from her holocron that Bane would find the final piece of the puzzle that he needed in order to construct his own holocron. Speaking of Darth Bane, let us begin our final tier, and Tier 1, with the arrival of Lord Bane himself. Of course, Darth Bane had to make an appearance on our list. Despite the fact that he grew up as a miner on some backwater planet with no formal education to speak of, Darth Bane was incredibly cunning, more so than any other Sith of his time. While most remember Bane for his physical strength and powers in the Force, or that he created the Rule of Two, most don't know the extent of his strongest attribute, his very mind. The primary thing that Bane found disgusting in the Sith of his time was that they were failing to embrace what made the Sith strong in the first place, their guile and backstabbing nature. In the past, this made the Sith Order weak, but it would be Bane who engineered the perfect philosophy to turn this into the saving grace of the entire Sith Order. Bane manipulated many people, and most of them were other Sith. Bane actually manipulated Lord Khan into setting off the very thought bomb that erased all of the Sith in the first place. In the Battle of Ruusan, the Jedi and Sith armies were at a standstill on the ground since the Brotherhood of Darkness was in bad shape. Since they were not winning as fast as they thought, the Jedi couldn't wipe out the Sith easily at all, since the Brotherhood had blockaded the planet and weren't letting any Republic ship through. Bane pretended to be under the mind control of Lord Khan, and when the time was right, he got on the communications and ordered the Sith fleet to engage with the Jedi fleet. This opened up a gap in the blockade, and the Jedi supply ships were able to come through. This pressured the already unstable Lord Khan into activating the Thought Bomb ritual, which played right into Bane's hands. And this is one of the many plots that Darth Bane executed over his career, not to mention that he literally created the Rule of Two, the ideology that would lead to the ultimate ascension of the Sith Order. Still on Tier 1, we have Darth Plagueis the Wise. He doesn't come by the title of Darth Plagueis the Wise for any reason. Darth Plagueis, among many other Sith, was considered to be the most intelligent Sith of all time, having discovered a new method of immortality by literally manipulating the midichlorians themselves. Plagueis had also achieved his master's method of pseudo-essence transfer by figuring out that he could swap one's consciousness into another clone vessel. His chapter in the Book of the Sith is filled with the brim with all of his wild experiments, which include a few theories he never got to test, but was able to reasonably prove as possible, which includes using the Force to fold the fabric of space to essentially achieve a form of teleportation, or the ability to manipulate the midichlorians in another Force sensitive to cut them off from the Force entirely. He very thoroughly breaks down the structure of midichlorians into 3 easily understood categories: the pneuma, the animaya, and the Aperon, each of these governing a different aspect of life in the midichlorians. Outside of his scientific advancements, Plagueis would be the one to pull the strings of the Naboo conflict that eventually led into the Clone Wars. Speaking of the clones, it was the combined effort of Plagueis and Sidious that would convince Master Sifo-Dyas to order the creation of the clone army from the Kaminoans. Before he was replaced by Sidious, Plagueis was the central hub of all things concerning the Separatist and the Trade Federation, as well as being the mastermind behind the galaxy's events by using his influence with the intergalactic banking clan. Perhaps the only pitfall of Darth Plagueis is he too does not believe in the mysticism of the Force, which is why there may be an argument that the next two Sith we discussed may be marginally more intelligent. However, I still fully believe that Darth Plagueis belongs in Tier 1. Next, we have Revan, a figure that needs very little introduction. Revan is one of the most fascinating individuals in all of the lore. He belongs in Tier 1 because of his borderline overpowered tactical mind. During the Mandalorian Wars, Revan would prove himself to be a tactical genius by fighting the Mandalorians in a way that they did not expect. Revan actually cut some moral corners in order to secure some very key victories against the Mandalorians by sacrificing entire systems as well as countless lives for the greater good. This threw off the Mandalorians, who were expecting for the Jedi to fight fair. He was also known for creating intentionally convoluted plans and strategies to lull his opponents into confusion before simply overpowering them with superior numbers and firepower. Once he became Darth Revan, he was able to turn all of his tactical genius plus the power of the Starforge against the Republic, while rallying a good many of them to his side. Completely blindsided, the Republic was almost at Darth Revan's mercy before the Jedi Masters faked his death and erased his memories entirely, deeming him too dangerous. At one point in the future, Revan had separated himself from his darker half, and Darth Revan's spirit went out and made all kinds of foils that Light Revan had to deal with. Revan had to literally defeat himself in a game of wits and eventually won. However, we have one more Sith that may be more intelligent than even Revan, and belongs in Tier 1 as well. Many of you have already guessed that the final Sith Lord we are discussing today is that of Darth Sidious. But can you really blame us? Sidious would be the one who would orchestrate an entire war by pulling the strings on both sides of the conflict. He was in complete control of everything, everywhere, all at once. Anyone who challenged him was crushed. Anyone who questioned him was silenced. He was in a precarious position and came close to being found out a few times, but each time, he still won. He managed to turn two of the Order's best Jedi against them, that of course being Dooku and Anakin, both of which struck critical blows against the Republic and the Jedi Order. Order 66 went swimmingly, and he managed to cloud the vision of even Grandmaster Yoda himself. And above all, he got away with everything while hiding in plain sight. He was able to fool the entire Jedi Council when they were all sitting in the same room. All the trillions of beings in the galaxy, and each of the 100,000 Jedi were all merely chess pieces on a board for Sidious and his machinations. But this didn't stop after his victory, or even his death. Whichever continuity you would like to go with, Palpatine always returns. And that is why he also belongs firmly on Tier 1. So my friends, what did you think of our picks for this list and this tier? Would you have ordered them differently? And did we leave out anyone you were hoping to see? Be sure to let us know down below, and be sure to like the video as well, as we put a lot of effort into them. As always my friends, may the Force be with you, go in peace, and I hope that you have a great day.
Just let me fall to my